everyone, and thanks for joining me for this worm update. Moving towards possible harvesting of the castings in these bins, I've got some really happy worms here digging into the remnants of what I think is a cantaloupe from last week, but everything is looking good. I'm going to give the bin a large feeding this week, and I'm putting in Brussels sprouts. You'll see me add that to the end. A word of warning: when it comes to Brussels sprouts or cabbage or things in that family, you want to be very careful if you add them to the bin and the bins are somewhere that you pass by, because they can get stinky. I'll let you know if freezing them first, because I've never frozen them before, but I will let you know next week if freezing them made any type of impact on the smell. But I'm going out on a limb here and seeing how this will affect, because the cabbage before smelled awful. Overall, with this bin, everything looks to be okay, and for the amount of material in this bin, I do think it's time to start harvesting or taking the bin towards harvest in the next 4 weeks, so I'll be moving into that stage. Moving over to the second of the regular totes, this is the one that tends to run a little bit wetter than its sister bin, and there was a lot of worm activity towards the top of the bin. Overall, this bin is looking really well, and I'm going to move it towards the harvest stage as well as its sister bin. I am making a decision, and I do have to make it pretty quick, whether I want to add any cardboard to this one before putting it into a harvest mode where I'm not adding any additional material. But just like the other bin, I gave it a larger feeding. No worm ball or grouping of worms to show, although what I saw from the worms in here, everyone looks to be happy and healthy and okay. So this one as well got set up for the next week. The first of my regular totes up is the tote that is on the same timeline as the two regular totes. This particular bin is been having a little bit of an issue with keeping the moisture in. This week I feel like it is a good balance in here. It's not too dry at the edges, although it is always going to be dry around the edges of it. As far as the amount of material, I think I do want more, but I want to show you something with the worms. If you can see it, you want to pause it and look in the ball of worms here, you'll see really small white worms. Those are a pest. I've heard the term called potworm for them. They aren't a problem until they start having larger numbers than your actual worms. So don't be alarmed if you see them. They're not the larvae from the fruit flies or gnats that can get in. As I mentioned, I did want to put some additional material, so I added some pre-moistened cardboard that was shredded into the bin and mixed it all up before feeding it. And once again, I did give the bin a larger feeding this week just to see if the colony in here can handle a larger feeding. Sometimes I'll do that, and if there's too much food left over, I know to cut it down for the following week. But I did want to see if my colony maybe had increased, so I'm going to give all three of these colonies a larger feeding and then set them up for the next week. The worms are looking good here as well. No unhappy traveling worms on the lid or on the sides. The second regular tote is the tote that I have been working with since December. It will be a while before this particular tote actually gets harvested, as I am integrating the worms from the breeder bin into this bin. Last week I added all of the contents from the breeder bin into this one, and then I topped it off with some moistened cardboard. I want to mix that in this week just to make sure the cardboard is incorporated everywhere, because the castings themselves prior to this were pretty dried out. So I want to make sure that everything is has the correct levels of moisture in the bedding so that the worms can thrive. And I'm also going to put some of those Brussels sprouts that were frozen in this bin. I do hope I don't have a stinky bin when it comes to the following week of videos. I will be sure to let you know what my nose encountered, but I'm giving it a bigger size feeding than I normally do, and also things that tend to hold a bit more moisture to make sure that it doesn't dry out with that addition of the cardboard. Once I have done this, this is all set up for the next week, and I believe I will be adding some more worms to this one in a few weeks because I will be harvesting the breeder bin. I did add the paper back on top of this and made sure I did moisten that as well. Every opportunity to add moisture to this bin I do take advantage of, or even just all Vermi bag totes, because the Vermi bag is made to have the water evaporate. Going over to the breeder bin itself, I am not doing much to this one except for feeding it up. No weird fungus on the top of it this week, and even though there's some bits of it that look dry, it's just some cocoa coir from the very beginning that didn't get well moistened. So with this bin, not doing much but just adding more food and grit. And I do spray down the covering that I add onto this bin just to make sure that all sides have some contact with water. It's okay if this is a bit on the wetter side, as the worms do like that. And then this bin will be set up for the next week. And for the last of my vermicomposting systems, we come to the Vermibag Mini. And this week I had some really good success with keeping the Vermibag Mini edges moisturized. So of course it's not going to look on camera as damp as the center did have quite a bit of moisture in it. But when I moved through and pulled the bedding from the sides, it didn't have that noticeable crunch that it always does. And the castings underneath didn't have that dried out texture. I actually found a miniature worm ball on that side, a good grouping of worms. So I'm making some progress on the edges of the Vermibag Mini. It's just going to take extra work to keep them from being too dried out. So I'm going to continue what I have been doing with this because it seems to be successful. I'm going to take the frozen material that I have and make a trench for it and line it and add the grit on one side, and then do the same on the other side. Once I cover that all up, I am going to make a little hole in the center and then put a large piece of frozen food. Now this just so happened to be a big chunk of frozen cantaloupe. I wanted to, again, kind of test the boundaries of the Vermibag Mini and just make sure if any leachate would come out from that, because I have been adding quite a bit of water to this particular bin, and I am going to wet this down as well on the top and all over. I even did hit that centerpiece, so we'll see how that affects the bin for next week. I also am not looking forward to having really wet castings at the end of the harvest period, so we'll see if, with me trying to battle the dryness on the edges, I've impacted how wet the castings are at final harvest. But that completes the update on all of my bins. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. I really do hope you enjoyed the content. If you do, please like and subscribe, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Take care.